Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a really significant political event unfolding in South Korea.
That's right. The declaration of martial law by President Yoon Suk-yeol, and then almost immediately, its rejection by the parliament.
It's created quite a crisis. So, to help us understand this, we're drawing on analysis from two main sources today.
Yes, we've got insights from RTVE Noticias, featuring Alejandro Lopez from Descifrando la Guerra, and also reporting from BBC News Mundo.
Good. Different perspectives there. Our goal, as always, is to really dive deep, understand the implications of this martial law declaration, the parliament's role, and, the whole backstory to this crisis.
Exactly. To give our listeners a clear, concise picture of what's happening and why it matters.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. What exactly does declaring martial law mean, especially in South Korea? Alejandro Lopez on RTVE explained it's a kind of national emergency measure.
Precisely. It basically involves suspending certain constitutional guarantees. The primary one, according to Lopez, was political activity. The idea being, it seems, to prevent the parliament from actually functioning.
Right, to stop them meeting or voting?
Yeah, and it goes further. RTVE mentioned potential restrictions on things like media freedom, controls on movement,
Wow.
even suspending due process for arrests and trials for anyone opposing the martial law. It's serious stuff.
And BBC News Mundo added more detail, didn't they? They mentioned installing a military government, basically putting the military in charge.
And deploying troops, police around the parliament building itself.
Again, temporarily banning parliamentary sessions, military control of the media. BBC even noted this real nervousness on local TV, you can imagine.
Absolutely. That idea of a military government controlling information flow, it's a classic feature when martial law is invoked, historically speaking. It concentrates power significantly.
But here's the crucial turn. The parliament didn't just roll over, they unanimously rejected it.
Unanimously. Which, as Lopez pointed out on RTGE, essentially paralyzes the president's move and triggers, well, a major constitutional crisis.
So the parliament actually has the power to do that.
Yes, that's key. Both sources, RTVE and BBC, highlight that the South Korean constitution gives the parliament the specific power to revoke, or, as Lopez put it, strike down a martial law decree.
That check and balance is vital, I suppose.
Absolutely fundamental in a democracy.
And we should remember the political context here. Both sources mentioned this after the last elections. The opposition, the Democratic Party, holds a strong majority in parliament.
Right. So you could argue the rejection was somewhat predictable, given that opposition majority.
So was this whole thing, as Lopez suggested, maybe an auto-gulp, a self-coup attempt,
Right.
trying to preempt the parliament?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Deploying security forces before the vote certainly raises questions about the intent. Was it just about stopping that specific vote?
And BBC confirmed the opposition did successfully vote to repeal it.
Yes, they did. 190 out of the 300 assembly members present voted to strike it down. A clear majority.
Okay, so where do the armed forces fit into this? Alejandro Lopez stressed their role is critical.
Very much so. RTVE mentioned that President Yoon had made changes in the military leadership beforehand, possibly trying to install figures more aligned with him, reversing some appointments made by the previous president even.
Ah, interesting. And the opposition saw this as what? An attempt to set up a military regime.
That was the concern voiced, according to RTVE, that it was less about the judicial system and more about military control.
But despite that initial show of force, the troops later withdrew from the parliament.
That's what RTVE reported, yes. They seemed to pull back, waiting for presidential confirmation that ultimately didn't come after the parliament's vote.
And the situation got even messier for the president, right? BBC reported the police are actually investigating him for insurrection.
Insurrection, yes. That's a very serious charge. And it gets worse. BBC also revealed that key figures in his own government, like the Vice Minister of Defense, apparently didn't even know about the plan.
They were kept in the dark.
Seems so. The defense minister resigned over it. Even the leader of the president's own party criticized the action as incorrect.
Wow. It sounds like he acted quite unilaterally, almost isolated within his own government.
It certainly paints a picture of a decision made with very little internal consensus, which significantly weakens his position now. And that investigation adds a whole other layer of legal and political jeopardy.
So why? Why would he take such a drastic, seemingly ill-planned step? What was the official reason given?
Well, the justification, according to BBC, was about protecting the country from North Korea and anti-state forces. RTVE mentioned eliminating subversive elements linked to the North.
The North Korea threat, is that the real reason, or is it, as Alejandro Lopez suggested, potentially an excuse?
That's a crucial point Lopez made. He described Yoon as fervently anti-communist, even drawing parallels to past military dictatorships.
Yeah.
There seems to be a tendency to blame North Korea for internal problems.
And didn't the president also lash out at the parliament itself? BBC mentioned him calling it a den of criminals trying to block his administration.
Yes, that highlights the sheer level of antagonism between the executive and the legislature before this even happened.
So maybe the real drivers were more domestic. BBC pointed to his incredibly low approval ratings, below 20%.
Right, very low, plus ongoing corruption scandals, stock manipulation allegations, his wife receiving a luxury bag, things like that.
And the fact that he couldn't get laws passed because of that opposition majority in parliament.
Exactly. BBC also mentioned a specific battle over the national budget happening right before the martial law declaration. RTVE added that there were attempts to censure members of his cabinet, too.
So it feels like maybe he felt cornered politically.
That's a strong possibility. That this was a desperate measure born out of a sense of political paralysis and pressure from multiple angles internally.
And crucially, RTVE noted there haven't been any statements from North Korea that actually back up Yoon's justification.
Which really reinforces the idea that this is primarily an internal political drama, not driven by a genuine external threat.
Though Lopez did warn there could still be regional consequences depending on how this plays out.
Of course. Any instability in South Korea has wider implications. But the root cause seems domestic.
Let's talk about the impact and the historical memory this must trigger.
Definitely. BBC Newsmundo really emphasized the trauma associated with the last time martial law was imposed back in 1979 after President Park Chung-hee's assassination. That led to years of military repression.
So for South Koreans, this isn't just some abstract legal measure. It brings back terrible memories.
Exactly. Which helps explain why Yoon's decree was so shocking. It was the first time martial law had been invoked since South Korea transitioned to democracy in 1987. A real jolt to the system.
And the opposition isn't letting this go, are they? BBC mentioned they're pushing for an impeachment motion now.
Yes, the pressure for his resignation or impeachment is very high and ongoing. His political future looks incredibly precarious right now.
Okay, so let's recap. A sudden declaration of martial law, justified by external threats, but likely driven by internal political crisis, low popularity, scandals, legislative gridlock.
Then a swift, unanimous rejection by the parliament, exercising its constitutional power, triggering a major crisis.
The military's role was tense but didn't escalate into a full coup, and the president now faces investigation and calls for impeachment.
And all of this reviving painful memories of the country's authoritarian past.
It really underscores the strength of South Korea's democratic institutions that parliament could push back so effectively, but it also raises questions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a testament to the democratic checks and balances, but the episode itself is worrying.
Which leads us to our final thought for you, our listeners. What does this whole episode tell us about the health of democracy in South Korea, and maybe more broadly, about the risks when leaders turn to extraordinary measures during times of intense internal political stress?
That's a really pertinent question to reflect on. How this crisis unfolds and the lessons learned will certainly be significant, not just for South Korea, but potentially as a case study elsewhere.
If you want to delve deeper into these kinds of geopolitical, defense, and security issues, we definitely recommend subscribing. It's free to the GODs.com magazine. Lots of expert analysis there.
Yes, GODs.com is an excellent resource for anyone wanting a more nuanced understanding of global affairs.
And we also want to give a special thank you to Colonel Jose Luis Esparza for his analysis. His insights are always incredibly valuable for understanding these complex situations.
Indeed. His expertise adds crucial depth to discussions like these.
Thank you all for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next episode.